Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our Talks with Walt, as we are calling our working now through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We turn now in the Children of Adam section to Out of the Rolling Ocean, the Crowd. It's a strange title, and it will be obviously in our first line. This is one of several what we'll call ocean poems in Leaves of Grass, and as we meet them, we'll make observations about them. Now again, our assumptions is that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net. Down that left-hand side, Talks with Walt, our playlist. Everything from inscriptions, and we're going to meet one of the poems early on in inscriptions, all the way up through 1 hour to Madness and Joy that we just finished. Now we're going to turn, first of all, to a little bit of background information. This is one of those poems. There's a number of them like this in Leaves of Grass, where there's all kinds of interesting backstory that we want to pay attention to. Norton's tells us this poem, probably composed in the early 1860s, was originally a drum taps poem from 1865. We'll get to the drum taps section later, and was transferred to the Children of Adam group in 1871. It seems remarkably to anticipate the Walt Whitman and Gilchrist episode, and was actually addressed, according to Ellen O'Connor, to Mrs. Juliet H. Beach of Albion, New York, who had written a favorable notice of the third edition of Leaves of Grass, which had earned the wrath of her husband, who substituted a hostile review in the Saturday Press of June the 2nd, 1860. The story actually was corroborated by Clara Barris, John Burroughs' biographer. Before 1881, the poem's two sections were numbered, the second being enclosed within parentheses, and of course note the characteristic use of italics for direct address, something that we have actually seen and will even point out. Now, as we get ready to read this poem, there's a couple of places that probably make sense for us to spend some time. It won't shock you that we will go back to Song of Myself. Are you noticing a trend here where we're looking at different passages from Song of Myself, which we've already dealt with in detail? But just to remind ourselves, hey, how about this from passage 17? Do you remember this one? These are really the thoughts of all men in all ages and lands. They are not original with me. If they are not yours as much as mine, they're nothing or next to nothing. If they are not the riddle and the untying of the riddle, they are nothing. If they are not just as close as they are distant, they are nothing. This is the grass that grows wherever the land is and the water is. This, the common air that bathes the globe. This idea of the juxtaposition of land, water, and the common air that bathes the globe, we will see when we pick up this poem here in a little bit. We also want to remember in cabin ships at sea. You remember this all the way back to the very beginning of our study. In cabin ships at sea, the boundless blue on every side expanding with whistling winds and music of the waves, the great imperious waves. On some lone bark buoyed on the dense marine, where joyous full of faith, spreading white sails, she cleaves the ether mid the sparkle and the foam of day, or under many a star at night. By sailors young and old haply, will I a reminiscence of the land be read in full report at last. And then notice again the italics get used. Here are our thoughts, voyagers' thoughts. Here not the land, firm land alone appears, may then by them be said, the sky or arches here. We feel the undulating deck beneath our feet. We feel the long pulsation, ebb and flow of endless motion, the tones of unseen mystery, the vague and vast suggestions of the briny world, the liquid flowing syllables, the perfume, the faint creaking of the cordage, the melancholy rhythm, the boundless vista, and the horizon far and dim are all here. And this is Ocean's poem. Then, falter not, O book, fulfill your destiny. You, not a reminiscence of the land alone, you too, as a lone bark cleaving the ether purposed, as I know not whither, yet ever full of faith, consort to every ship that sails, sail you, bear forth to them folded my love. It'll be interesting the use of that word, dear mariners, for you I fold it here in every leaf. Speed on my book, spread your white sails, my little bark athwart the imperious waves, chant on, sail on, bearer over the boundless blue, from me to every sea, this song for mariners and all their ships. Well, that will set us up now for this poem, Out of the Rolling Ocean, the Crowd. Let's read it and then we'll annotate. Out of the rolling ocean, the crowd came a drop gently to me, whispering, I love you. Before long I die. I've traveled a long way merely to look on you and to touch you, for I could not die till I once looked on you, for I feared I might afterward lose you. Now we have met, we've looked, we're safe. Return in peace to the ocean, my love. I too am part of that ocean, my love. We are not so much separated. Behold the great rondure, the cohesion of all, how perfect. But as for me, for you, the irresistible sea is to separate us. As for an hour, carrying us diverse, yet cannot carry us diverse forever. Be not impatient, a little space. Know you, I salute the air, the ocean, and the land, every day at sundown, for your own dear sake, my love. As we pointed out, the use of that word, my love. Now, let's go through and annotate and make some observations. First of all, this out of the, we're going to hear this with out of the cradle endlessly rocking. It's a formulation that Whitman really actually enjoys. Out of the rolling ocean, the crowd. Notice how he loves to do this, where he draws word pictures. That is to say, the ocean is kind of like the crowd. And then came a drop gently to me. Now this drop is again going to be understood in some ways as the feminine of this poem here, and a little bit and all of that. Notice the use of the word gently in Leaves of Grass. He loves it. Whispering, of course, he loves this word as well. And notice the italicized. I love you, before long I die. This again may be someone who actually spoke to him and wanted to see him. I've traveled a long way merely to look on you, to touch you, for I could not die till I once looked on you. It is true that Whitman had a number of female admirers, for I feared I might afterward lose you. And then a break, and no more italicized, and then the word now. Notice that I came, right, a crowd, out of the rolling ocean, the crowd came, a drop from the past tense now to the present tense. Now we have met. We have looked. We are safe. Notice the repetition of three we's. We'll get to our fourth 2 lines later. Return in peace to the ocean, my love. Now, I'm going to set this up. At the very end of our study, it's one of the reasons we'll read all these poems in Leaves of Grass to get to that very final poem, Farewell, My Fancy. And we'll be having a conversation all the way through Leaves of Grass, back and forth with Whitman the poet to Whitman the person, Whitman the poet and the person to you the reader, and any number of other ways that we'll have this kind of my love or my fancy as it's understood. He says, now we've met and we have looked, we are safe. Return in peace to the ocean, my love. The drop returning back to the ocean. It's, of course, a provocative word picture, and it's one that we will have seen in a lot of different literature, right? I, too, am part of that ocean, my love. We are not so much separated. In other words, we're all connected. And then he uses this word picture that's quite compelling. He calls it the great rondure, the great circle. When we get to Song of Exposition, in passage number 7, he'll say, our own rondure, the current globe I bring, and we'll come back to that idea one more time. The cohesion. I told you, he loves that word cohesion, that which brings us together, that which holds us together, adhesive type of idea, right? Coercion, he says, of all, how perfect, exclamation point. In the previous poem, we saw a lot of exclamation points. How perfect. But, as for me, for you, the irresistible sea is to separate us. Now, whether he's speaking literally or metaphorically, this idea that even though we are a part of the ocean, there is somehow separation between us. As for an hour, I told you he loves the construction of the use of the word hour, carrying us diverse. That is to say, we're obviously celebrating the idea of the separateness here. Yet, cannot carry us diverse forever. In other words, we will be together at some point in the future. But he says it, be not impatient. Notice the use of the dash to remind us of Emily Dickinson, of course. A little space. Notice again the use of the word dash to emphasize the idea of space. Know you, I salute the air, the ocean, and the land. Again, we're back to earlier lines that we saw in both Song of Myself and then earlier in the inscription section, right? I salute the air, the ocean, and the land every day at sundown, at the end of the day, for your dear sake, my love. Now, there is a way to read much of Leaves of Grass as a salutation, a saluting from Whitman to you, the reader, and of course here possibly to an admirer as well. Well, let's go ahead and say it to a possible messages here. The power of friendship, no question, right? The idea that somehow you can be a drop within the whole ocean. To be, the use of the italics is interesting here, as well as, of course, the word picture of a rondeur. At 3a, we've mentioned other parts of Leaves of Grass, but I want to mention Crossing Brooklyn Ferry, because we're going to come back to this idea later, that somehow, in Brooklyn Ferry may be one of the most beautiful places that Whitman is able to make this argument. The way somehow we're all connected, even though we're separated, is quite a remarkable text. We'll get to it later. Other kind of ocean texts come to mind. I'll just mention, of course, Melville's Moby Dick, 1851. Think about that, 4 years before the 1855 publishing of Leaves of Grass. Of course, a text that's going to talk about the power of the ocean. Finally, at 3b, a way for you to own this text, was a time that you felt like a small drop in a large ocean. And did that lead to a feeling of separateness for you? Did it feel like a feeling of safety in some ways for you? Well, Whitman is constantly challenging us to see both sides of a word picture, which is what makes him so much fun to read. Thank you.